Instead, it's totally fine to actually just take the pawn, and then we can complete our development and try to get that knight to d5. Let's castle. How can we try to get the knight to d5? Could somebody chart for me a course that this knight could potentially take to land eventually on d5? Second question, how is bishop g4 often met? What move do we like to play in these situations? Because it's just a helpful move, and it forces him to sort of commit. Yes, h3. So first of all, let's make some luft for the king. As many of you guys are saying, no, knight d2 would blunder the bishop. But the idea is knight a3, knight c4, and knight e3. And through e3, that's Frankfurt Airport. That's where you can fly to all the good European destinations. But before you can fly to European destinations, you have to pass airport security. Airport security is the knight on f6, which controls d5. How do we hypothetically get rid of that knight? And I probably maybe should have played this move first, but we don't really have to get rid of the knight. But how could we get rid of the knight? Bingo. The Smyslov idea. I've shown that game a million times. Bishop to g5. Let's make this move first, because if I didn't play it, he'd probably go h6. Okay, what should we do now? Do we take? Do we drop it back? Are you paying attention to what I just said? If yes, then you should, yeah. Knight c4. Guess what? We're trying to get the knight over to d5. That's literally what I'm trying to do. There's also a very nice tactical detail, which he may allow us to demonstrate if he plays b5. Okay, he doesn't. Now, there is a problem with knight e3. What we need to notice here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the d3 bishop is a type 2 undefended piece. And it's defended by the queen. The queen is overloaded. So if knight e3, that severs the connection between f3 and d3. He can take on f3 and ruin the bishop. Ruin the bishop. Well, he can ruin the bishop, but ruin the pawn structure is what I meant to say. So what should we do? Yeah, so g4 is possible, but it kind of weakens the king side, guys. What we actually can do here, and this is something which is sort of not unique to a high level. You shouldn't be afraid to trade queens to accomplish what you want. The d5 square is still a sexy outpost in the event of an endgame. That doesn't change. So what bishop e2 accomplishes is now we don't have to worry about this knight being captured. Finally, we are ready to go to d5. And he prevents us from going to d5. But in doing so, he gets kind of passive. Now let's deal with this standoff. I'm tired of this standoff, so I'm going to go knight to d2. Because I'm just tired of him constantly hanging this over my head. And we are going to deal with this knight on e7. What this creates is a situation where he is quite passive. Okay, so he wants to take on e3. There's not much I can do to stop him, and I should. Now, I want to get this other knight to c4. The problem with knight c4 is that he's going to play b5 and chase away the knight. Can I prepare knight c4? How can I prepare knight c4? We can play a4. This is a kind of a King's Indian idea. I have to say, this guy is also playing tremendously well. He's playing on a 2600 level, so I'm trying my best to nurture my positional advantage. But this guy is super, super strong. What should we take with? What should we take with? We should actually take with the knight, exactly, because now we have access to this square. His knight is basically a slave to this square. The queen can take the knight's place on c4. So this knight on e7 is pretty immobilized. As soon as it moves, well, as soon as it moves, we're going to stick our knight on d5, and we're actually threatening a fork, which he misses. And the moment the knight comes to d5, we basically win the game. This isn't the entire story, because once he moves his king, how much material do we actually win here? Should we even take his queen? Let's do some calculation. That's actually pretty poetic, I have to say. And I am going to disable the alerts during the speedrun. Yeah, we get the exchange. We take on c6, we take on d8. Now, a lot of people here would notice the pawn on b2, and they would probably go b3. But we don't actually have to go b3. We have an even better move. Remember that when you are up in exchange, taking off a pair of rooks would be essentially squarely in our favor. But actually, wait a second. On second thought, guys, I am wrong. Because if rook d1, he is going to take his rook, and then he's going to snap off the pawn on b2. And what I missed is that he's also going to be forking the a pawn. So let's actually, we will go b3. Because he wins just a little too many pawns there, and I'm afraid that even in the event of a rook trade, we won't have any pawns left, so, you know. Okay, knight a5. Now that knight takes b3 doesn't actually come with a fork, we can go ahead and play rook a to d1. Rook f to d1 would also be fine. Now, if he takes on b3, yeah, so he goes here. How should we follow up? We have now gained the d file, but we need to squeeze the most out of that d file by playing rook to d7. We are making contact with this type 2 undefended pawn. The knight is protecting it, which means that b4 is a good move. But let's instead start just taking all of his pawns. Here's one pawn, here's another one. We are now up a pawn and the exchange. And our ultimate long-term plan, if he allows it, if he doesn't go rook to d8. If he does, we will deal with that. But where should this rook go? Yeah, piggy's on the 7th. Stack up that 7th ring. That is such a typical endgame idea, and it's such a strong one because we are going to win this pawn. We are going to win the game. Okay. So pretty smooth and a nice positional game. So d6 he kind of pre-moved. I don't think he expected c3. And this gives white a very nice center. We've sort of talked about this. Now at this level, you can see that these guys, they make very reasonable moves, right? At an earlier rating, c takes d4 was often the move that that was played against us, hey Montana Chess. And as you guys know, the problem with this is it gives the b1 knight the c3 square. It's very cooperative. At this level, you know, they strike in the center, they don't back down, knight f3, knight c6, and I take on c5. So the key property of this position that gives white that slight but stable advantage is that d5 square, which is going to be a perpetual weakness. There is no equivalent weakness on d4 because I have a pawn on c3 that's protecting that. So ultimately here is where I charted the course for the knight. Knight a3, knight c4, knight e3, knight d5. Now you guys might look at this and say, well, that's like 4 moves. I've talked about the 3-move rule, which is a good way to estimate whether an idea you have is realistic. If it takes 3 moves or longer, I often claim that the idea is unrealistic. But you need to take that with a very serious grain of salt. I'm not saying that I'm literally putting my head down and I'm going to make these moves in succession. What I'm talking about is an ultimate goal, not a plan where I make one move after the other move, regardless of what he does. So what we see in practice is I play knight a3, then I play bishop g5 and take his knight out, right? Then I play knight c4. I don't even play knight e3. I'm making these moves in a very measured fashion. So knight e3, bishop takes f3, forces me to play gf and ruin my structure. By the way, the nice detail, if he goes b5, this may seem very nasty because after knight e3, what move does he now have? So if you've been paying attention to what I just said, not c4. c4 is not dangerous, guys. e4 is not dangerous. Don't make a move just because it threatens a piece. All right, I don't want to see that. Bishop b2. You know better. c4 is tempting. Don't fall for temptation. In fact, this becomes a very weak pawn chain, which white can undermine with a4, undermining the b5 pawn. The move is bishop takes f3. And here, white has a very sexy response. How do we find this move? We put on our Sam Shankland hats. Our Sam Shankland hats tell us, well, if a move is impossible, we first ask ourselves, what happens if I do it anyway? What happens if I do it anyway? You must ask yourself that question. You must allow yourself to look at certain positions. And if you look at those positions, then you have a better chance of not ruling stuff out instinctually. Poitou for president. You play queen f3 anyway. b5 pawn blocks the pathway back of the queen. Rook a1 traps the queen. Look at that. So I saw that, which is why knight c4 was justified. And the queen is trapped. Black is busted. If he goes knight d4, you can simply take the knight and nothing has changed. So anyways, that's what would have happened if b5. Now you might ask, well, why can't we do this anyway? Here, well, the pawn is on b7, which means the queen can escape. So it's very important not to generalize. That's why we played bishop b2. And I think black probably should have gone for the endgame. I think the endgame would have lessened black's load a little bit. But queen c7, knight e3, knight e7. I asked myself what happens if I do it anyway. It only takes 1 second. My claim to you guys is that once you consider queen f3 and you look at this position, you don't need a grandmaster to find rook a1. Okay, everybody can see rook a1 given this position. It's just a matter of... So I would divide tactical difficulty into 2 different categories. Category 1 is like stuff that is hard to Let me think about how to formulate this. Category 1 is stuff that is hard to calculate. So it's a move that everybody sees like a sacrifice, but it leads to very chaotic it leads to a very chaotic continuation, and you have to calculate that, and it's hard. Category 2 are things that are hard to see, but not hard to calculate. It's like a Venn diagram. Okay, hard to calculate, hard to see, and then there's middle of the Venn diagram, which is both. And that's the kinds of problems that grandmasters solve. This is easy to calculate, but very hard to see. There's actually basically nothing to calculate. And you have to try to train both of these skills, if that makes sense. Okay, so bishop e2, knight e3. Now we go knight d2, a4 to prepare knight c4. White is slightly better. There's nothing huge about white's advantage, but it's an unpleasant position, and he finally buckles. This is my point. When you apply pressure on your opponent for so long, he's going to buckle. Rook d2 would be a good move, forcing me to play the relatively passive rook b1, and black should be able to hold a draw with a couple of accurate moves. This is probably already close to equal. He plays knight c8, allowing knight d5. Here, what should black have done instead of knight b6? Well, how do I determine who is better? Basically, the position is symmetrical with the exception of the d5 square. So white's slightly better. Chess Dojo live, another raid, 59. Welcome, everybody. We are doing this speed run. Yeah, rook e8, or you could also play king h8. Another two-category thing is a threat can be dealt with by removing the symptoms or by removing the cause. Rook e8 removes the symptoms, right? e7 is defended, but king h8 would remove the cause. I actually prefer this move. You often want to remove the cause because rook e8 actually basically ties down your rook to a passive existence. Although in this particular case, it doesn't really matter. And then black can play knight b6 to trade the knights off, or knight d6 to chase the queen away. Instead, of course, knight c8, knight b6 is a blunder. It doesn't drop the queen, but it does drop the exchange, and the rest is very, very straightforward. Any questions? That was a pretty straightforward game. Our opponent was good, but, you know, we didn't do anything. We didn't reinvent the wheel. Just sort of typical rudimentary positional principles were rehearsed. Looks like everybody is pretty clear on what we did. Excellent. Let's continue. Okay. Jimmy Fallon won. 2,400. Okay, so let's go e4. Let's go e4. This guy is good. e5. Okay, so here we're going to play my real openings. I'm going to play the Ruy Lopez. Now, I'm going to play my real openings, because these guys are serious. So I'm going to play my real openings. Okay, so d6 is fine. That is called the Steinitz variation. And white should not particularly change the way that I play. We already know that, well, d6 creates a pin. So from a logical perspective, what would be a good way to exploit that pin? It would be to open up the position with what move? We know that in the Ruy Lopez, there's two main ways to play. We can play c3 to prepare d4, but the immediate d4 is also perfectly good. And after e takes d4, knight takes d4, we exploit the fact that the knight can't move. Now, a very good move in this position is actually to take the knight. This is a hard move to understand. You guys might be like, wait a minute, isn't the whole point to like leave the knight there? And after the game, I'll explain the rationale behind this move. Basically, this softens up the e5 pawn. So it eventually, if I play this correctly, will force black into taking on d4 and yielding a lot of the center. So I'm going to castle. If he takes on e4, he opens up the e file, and I'm going to get a big initiative once that bishop appears on e4. Okay, so I'm going to take it. He does take anyway. Okay. And how do we... Very simple move. How do we attack this bishop and make a general improving move? Remember that we can take on e5 later to reclaim the pawn, but we don't need to rush with that. We play rook e1. And now, the thing is, we're attacking this pawn and we're pinning him. I feel like white is better here. Okay, so we have several things that we can take. It's like a buffet. What should we capture here? What should we start by capturing? And there's several possibilities. But the e5 pawn isn't going anywhere, because my advice to you guys... See, here I think a lot of you guys are falling into a slightly faulty pattern of thinking, this is the pawn I actually want to capture, because e5 is not going anywhere. He is not going to play e takes d4, because that disastrously opens up the e file. And so now we can play d takes e5. Obviously, I'm not going to take again because of the back rank mate, but the reason white is better here is because his pawn structure on the queen side is quite ruined and my pieces are very active. But we have to be very careful about how we follow this up. If we play bishop e3, mindlessly developing the bishop, we allow rook b8, and he wins the b2 pawn. So one possibility is to fianchetto with b3, but that weakens all of these dark squares. I don't really want to do that. The other thing that we can do in such positions is of course, just to move the queen. We're going to move it to a nice centralized location. We are also threatening to take on e5. White is slightly better. I'm not winning, but I have a very pleasant position. Let's speed up our pace of play a little bit. Then we can develop our bishop and bring our rook into the game. Again, I hope that people are more or less understanding my play. I'm not doing anything crazy. Okay, so rook b8 is a good move. I guess what he's trying to do is bait me into taking the pawn. What does black have in the event of queen takes e5? This pawn is actually kind of like an umbrella. Or it's a barricade that is separating his pieces from mine. He's got bishop f6 and his bishop opens up. The b2 pawn is lost. I don't want to allow any of that. So I actually, well, b3, he maybe has bishop to b4 and then bishop to c3, driving the bishop in. So what I'm going to do here is go c3. I am going to control the b4 square so his rook can't go there. And I'm also going to reinforce the threat of queen takes e5. Because once I take and he goes bishop f6, the bishop, as we know, is biting on granite. Yeah, I'm not sure why he allows me to take, but I'm just going to call his bluff here. And now I'm just going to be up a pawn in the endgame. Let's see if I can convert it into a win. Queen takes c5. The queen d6 was a bad move because now he can't avoid the queen trade, actually. He can move his queen away, but he doesn't. So rook takes c5, rook e8. That's a good move. He's heading for d1. And we need to be careful because if we move the bishop out once again, he has bishop f6. The rook has to move, and then rook takes b2 comes with great effect. So we shouldn't panic here. We simply need to target the cause of the threat, right? We can go king f1. That's a nice way to defend against rook d1. If rook d1 check, we simply drop our rook back, and we're going to do that anyway to stop rook d1, and we're fine for the time being. What's challenging here about white's position is untangling our queen side. If we untangle our queen side, we are going to be not completely winning, but we're going to be well on the way to winning the game. So rook b1 is one idea to open up the bishop. What is the problem with rook b1? Yeah, we should have gone rook e2. We're actually going... Yeah, bishop takes c3. So we're actually going to try rook e2 here. And the point of this is, of course, to bring the bishop out. If he goes rook d1 check, which he should do, but let's see if he finds this. Then I'm going to come back to e1. I'm just asking him to find this one move, and then we repeat the position, and I'm going to try to find an alternate method. But right now, he's not playing rook d1, so maybe he's hesitating for whatever reason. If anything, yeah, he does go rook to d1. So we have to, unfortunately, repeat the position. And I'm going to show you a 5-head idea if he drops his rook back, which he probably will, because trading rooks is in white's favor. We are up a pawn. I'm going to show you guys, prepare for a 5-head idea. Oh, he takes. Okay, so that is a little bit odd to me. What I think he's trying to do here is what he's trying to say is now I can't get the bishop out. But what he has forgotten is that I now have a little piece called a king, and the king can get stuff done. It absolutely can get stuff done. What do I mean by that? How can it get stuff done? Where can the king go in the name of liberating the bishop from c1? The king, of course, goes to this nice little c2 square. Then the bishop comes out. Finally, we can complete our development. We can bring the rook out, and we can convert our extra pawn. We do not need to defend h2 because of the move g3, Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky. But at the same time, and okay, well, we'll go rook d1. At some point, I want to move that h-pawn because I don't want to keep having to deal with this. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Like, why are you defending the pawn if you just said he can't take it? Yes, he can't take it, but does it make sense that I don't want to have to deal with this all the time? So now a4. What this move accomplishes is it fixes the weakness. The pawn on a5 is on a dark square. I want you guys to pay very careful attention to that. And guess what? He now allows us to exploit this weakness in textbook fashion. What should we do? Should we take the rook? And if we do take the rook, why? What will be our follow-up? Yeah, of course, we take the rook, and we have bishop b6. That is why we played a4. The pawn is immobilized, and he has a terrible choice. He can go bishop c7, and the pawn endgame is, of course, completely lost. But so is the bishop endgame. I'm going to be up 2 pawns, both of them on the queen side, and the game is over. So he really collapsed here quite quickly. Okay, so takes on a5. He's probably going to go here and try to corner my bishop, but the bishop has an escape route via b4. Okay. Now, the win is a very, very simple matter of pushing my pawns. But you always hear the advice, be patient in the endgame. What that really means is you want to make all the necessary improvements first. What kind of improvement can you make before pushing the pawns? So so let's bring the king out first so the king can supervise the progress of the pawns. We don't need to worry about the king side because the pawns are symmetrical. We need to watch for a pawn break, but by and large, we don't need to do anything. Now, even here, we can make an improvement before pushing the pawns up. We can reposition this bishop to which square? Yeah, bishop b4, bishop c5 is right. Bishop b4, bishop c5 is right. And only then, when all of these necessary improvements have been made, did you guys not see me play bullet against Min? 30 seconds is an eternity, folks. You are in the hands of a professional. Everybody take a deep breath. We will be just fine. Trust me on this one. We will be just fine. We go king c5 to force him to take the pawn. Then we are going to reposition our king to d5. And finally, we are going to bring the other pawn up to c4, c5, c6, and we are going to win. Do not try this. Okay, so I should have taken the pawn, but it doesn't matter because everything is protected. Just don't pre-move. We can actually pre-move c6 check because it is a check, but that is the only thing. We do not pre-move b6. Yeah, do not pre-move b6. And now we can transition into a pawn endgame, but first let's play b6. Now it's important here to notice the bishop on f4. Okay, bishop c7, bc, check. And now we bring our king in. And we are going to cause Zugzwang. And the game is over. So f4, we can just immobilize his pawns first. That's fine also. Okay, check. Now, what move should we make in this position? How do we force Zugzwang? What do we do? Okay, we move the bishop. Yeah, good job. I just wanted one person to answer this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the bishop to g5 in order to avoid the possibility of stalemate. That's actually a very important little trick, right? Just make sure the bishop doesn't control any possible squares. Okay. Are you guys a little bit convinced that everything was under control? Yeah, we're fine. It's cosmetically close, but it really isn't close. I know how much time I need to... And what you guys need to understand is I've played for so long that I know how much time I need to win these positions. I know that I'm going to win this with an abundance of time on my clock. I'm not trying to rub it in anyone's face. Okay. So this was a Ruy Lopez. And the first kind of surprising move is bishop takes c6, right? But I think it actually isn't as surprising as I'm making it out to be. We are simply weakening the e5 pawn. We're trying to get him to take on d4, which of course gives me a much better slice of the center. Okay, and this is just a super active position. Once he goes knight f6, you can get this bishop out to g5. White is slightly better. That's just bottom line what we're aiming for here is a slightly better position. Oh my god. And there we go. Jerky Sminian with 20. Are you kidding me? An Astral 96 throwing in a sub there. My lands, girl. The 4 a.m. hype is unreal. 20 gifted subs by Jerky Simon. KGB Operative throwing in his sub as well. And we are on the way back to magic. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Jerky Simon. You're the man and the damn girl also. So thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So once this happens, he goes knight f6 and we castle. Does this part of the game make sense, guys? We're actually kind of semi-sacrificing the pawn for an initiative, right? We are pushing him around. He's not developed, so I know that I'm going to win back the pawn, worst comes to worst. This is not, I'm not taking a big risk here. I'm sacrificing a pawn, oh my god, ruling snow. I know that I'm going to win back e5, Okay, so bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, bishop e7. Now, a lot of you guys wanted to take on e5. And there is a, well, this might transpose into the game. If he castles, I can take on b7. This is literally the game position. However, there was a move that deterred me from playing d takes e5 specifically. Could anybody tell me what move I am referring to? It's just a concrete thing, right? The move d5. And he intercepts my queen's access to b7, and he keeps the position closed. We do not want the position to be closed because we have the initiative. Maybe I can play e6 here. But how can black respond to this position? On the topic of not panicking, keep a cool head when you see a move like this, because sometimes you don't really have to do anything crazy at all. Thank you. Jared Lefty, look at these subs. That's what we like to see. We just castle because we simultaneously defend the pawn. And black is completely fine here. In fact, black might be better after c6. Okay? So that's the reason I didn't play de. I took on b7. And, well, e takes d4 is horrible for a variety of reasons. King Russo asks, what if you played f4 when the bishop was on e4? That's a great question. If he had played f5, ding, 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 this sets the alarm bells off in my head because this weakens his kingside even further. And guess what? He hasn't developed his bishop. So if I can get this bishop out of e4, then I'm going to have a direct artery to his king. That's not going to end well for black. So knight g5 is a typical attacking move. And now I can take on e5, and this just looks, I mean, this looks absolutely devastating. Well, Quicker Oats, in which position can he take on d4? Because his bishop is hanging here, and here he's pinned, so he never could capture on d4. Oh, you mean here? Yeah, so this opens up the e file. I mean, this move looks good. Although he's got f6 there, you can give a check, force the king back. I mean, White can just do nothing at all, just develop his pieces, and I've got full compensation. Thank you, Derpy Ebola, for the tier 1. Okay, whoops, sorry, my bad. So he castles, we take, and we drop the queen back to e4. Okay, we drop the queen back to e4, centralizing it, getting it out of the line of fire of the rook. And now, the calm stage of the game, we go c3 in order to protect the b4 square and the d4 square. This pawn is kind of a nice little pawn. And the follow-up move would have probably been to play b3 and then developing the bishop. So queen d6 is a big mistake. I think he forgot the pawn was hanging. He should have defended it. He should have played bishop f6 or whatever, bishop d6. He should have defended the pawn. And then he makes another mistake by trading queens. Black has a very clever way of avoiding the queen trade here. Who can tell me what it is? I mentioned it during the game, but I didn't say a specific move. The way that you need to find the specific move is, once again, to realize that when the bishop is on c1, white needs to worry about the back rank. Okay? And what that means is you could also think of the rook on e1 being a type 2 undefended piece. So the queen could just slide on over to c6. In fact, even queen d7 is good. And that's a vicious trap because after rook e8, black wins the queen. You cannot move the queen due to back rank checkmate. That is why if you have a chance to play a move like h3 in certain positions, that's a good idea because of tactics like these. Does that make sense? So he should have at least kept the queens on the board. So takes. This brings the game into an endgame. We go king f1 to prepare rook e1 against rook d1. Now the 5-head move if he didn't trade rooks. Okay, so let's say that he would have brought his rook back to d8, repeating the position. Let me guide you guys through I'm not saying this is an amazing move. I'm just saying it's a nice idea. It's an elegant idea. Now, the bottom line is I want to move the bishop out. Fact 1. Let's bring everybody on board with the fact that we want to bring. Does that make sense? The reason I want to bring the bishop out is because I need to complete my development to win this game. Now, we have already determined that defending the pawn on b2 opens up another tactic with bishop takes c3. And you cannot move the bishop out directly because you drop b2 and then you drop c3, etc. So the question I ask myself is, do I have any other methods of defending the b2 pawn so that I can bring the bishop out? We already know that rook e2 has been tried and it failed to the check. So that's where this idea comes from. You just need to apply some creativity. Thong me, look at you. Okay, who else can find it? Well, king e2, the problem is the king can't walk to c2 because there's a force field on the d file. b3 doesn't work because it drops c3. a4 is the correct move, but the idea is to put the rook on a2. That is the ultimate idea, rook a2, in order to liberate the bishop, okay? You can put the rook on a2. Now, isn't the rook passive there? I hear you guys, ugh, cringe, horrible. Temporarily. The rook's not going to stay on a2. Eventually, I'm going to find a way to do. Once the bishop moves out, I'm going to have the resources necessary to somehow defend the pawn again and then free up the rook. But it's all about the priorities here. It's okay to make an ugly-looking move as long as you are fulfilling a priority. Well, a4 gives the rook a little bit more space. Maybe you'll need the a3 square. That's all there is to it. Okay? So that's the bottom line idea. I can swear I saw a game like this. I can swear that I saw a game like this before. And in general, this notion of defending something in order to move a piece out of the way is a relatively common trope, actually. Oh, I do remember the game. Let me just find the game that I'm referencing here. I recently gave to my students a problem. It's a completely different position, but it's a similar concept that I think some of you guys should file away in your sort of mental Rolodex of positional ideas. The notion of wanting to play a move and not being able to play it because something is going to be hanging, right? Some pawn is going to be left hanging, for example. And so you simply, you make a contract with one of your pieces and you say, look, piece, look, rook, look, knight, I am going to force you to do something unglamorous, but I promise eventually you're going to be freed from this task once we do what we need to do. Okay, here's a good example of that. And this dovetails back into another concept of static versus dynamic concepts in chess. Something that is dynamic is temporary and likely to change. Something that is static is likely to stay the same. Piece placement is generally quite dynamic. You can change the way a piece sits on the board pretty quickly. So you don't need to worry about a piece being passive for a short duration of time. That's okay. Okay, so this position, right? Anderson against Vaganian. Anderson, one of the strongest positional players of all time. Now, when we look at this position, who is better and why? We are looking at it from White's perspective. So, well, White is better. Why is White better? What are the weaknesses of Black's position? Simple question. I'm not looking for any rocket science answers. Just look at the position. I'm looking for two things very specifically. And you guys got one after the other. So the d5 hole, and as so often happens, the d6 pawn is also weak. Backward pawn in the space in front of it. Now there is a problem. We have a way to occupy this square, and that is to play knight d5. How should we attack this pawn? If we wanted to attack the pawn on d6, what seems to be a pretty obvious way to immediately threaten that pawn? Well, e5 just blunders the pawn. Yeah, knight b5. Bishop f4 blunders the bishop. Knight controls the square. Knight b5. There is a problem with both of these moves. Both the moves knight b5 and knight d5 run into the same problem. What is that problem? Not a hard question, guys. Just look at the position. Yeah, b2 is hanging. And so Anderson said, aha, okay, wait a second. I need to defend b2. But, wait, whoa. I know a lot of you are going to start thinking b3. This is the 2200 move. b3 is a good move, but that's not the Grandmaster Ulf Anderson move. The Grandmaster move is while you are at it, you prepare another idea. And the move, beautiful, rook c2. Rook c2 is a very strong positional move. Why is it so good? Because you're simultaneously defending the pawn on b2, and you are also preparing to move the rook onto d2. Not insane, but very nice idea. And the funny thing is, Vaganian played a6 to stop knight b5. Anderson played rook d2, and Vaganian played knight d4 to plug the hole on the d file. And Anderson actually just sacks the exchange because he's got a pawn for the exchange, and this pawn is going to fall. It falls on the next move. He's got two pawns for the exchange, and the knight comes into d5. White's got a massive position, and you won the game in the end. Okay, so a couple of lessons here, and the second among them is that when you have an idea, you want to try to find the best execution for it. The best execution often involves preparing with the prophylactic move also an active idea. Would you be worried about bishop c3? No, because that gives away the fianchettoed bishop. And the pawn on c3, a great example of doubled pawns being good, covers the d4 square. So literally you cannot defend d6. You're just busted here. Does that make sense? So that's an echo of the concept we applied in the speedrun game. Of course, completely different, but hopefully you can see the similarity. Okay, so he took the rook, which is just bad, and now we get the king to c2. Same idea. Free up the bishop. And the rest is very simple. I mean, he shouldn't have gone rook d7. That accelerates his defeat. Completely overblown. If he did not go rook d7, what would be the plan of victory in this position? And we have discussed this time and time again. In these kinds of endgames, we simply need to identify the potential to create a passed pawn, and then we need to find the best way to do it. We have two good ways to create this passed pawn. The best, well, bishop d4, I'm actually not a huge fan of, because this bishop on e3, guys, is a huge asset. This bishop on e3 could not only help create a passed pawn, but it could also help attack this pawn. So I like bishop c5 to prepare b4. Also, this bishop paves the way for the pawn, because once the pawn reaches a6, hey, bishop's going to cover that a7 square, and we're going to be able to play a7. Trading more pieces is not always good. That is the point I have made from the very beginning of my speedrun. The fact that, okay, when you're up a pawn or you're up a piece, most trades are going to be good. But once you've traded down to an endgame, do not just blindly continue to trade. You see what I'm saying here. A piece can often be super valuable. Okay? And after rook d7, we win the pawn, and the game is over. If he had gone bishop c7, then we simply take and go b4. Completely winning pawn endgame. Any questions about this game? We played many more moves, but he could have resigned here. We made all of... Oh, that's from Goodwill Hunt. We made all of the necessary improvements, and we pushed the pawn. How about them apples? Okay. GG. Looks like, what is the best defense against the Ruy Lopez? Yeah, the Berlin is good. A6 is the main move. And then you get the main line with knight f6 and bishop e7. That's sort of the... I've won about when he brought the rook to... Absolutely, Mr. Boyd. I'm all ears, Mr. Boyd. He brought the rook down in this position. I mean, he brought the rook down several times. I assume you mean here. What's the question? Oh, there we go. Could he have brought the other rook? Oh, could he have brought the other rook to defend? Yes, he could have. That's not a bad move. But the thing is, I can just move my bishop out. And the rook on d1 is now under fire from both rooks, which means that he must now either shit or get off the pot, both of which are perfectly good scenarios. If he takes the rook, then we do what we want. If he moves the rook away, then that's great as well. I think that's a good expression to capture to capture the situation Black's rook is in. Anyways.